Good morning, good morning, good morning. Welcome to today's Morning Blast with myself and Mr. Michael Brown. It is Friday, the 27th of June. I'm not quite sure how we've made it almost to July already. It feels like it should be, well, it feels like Easter was yesterday, to be honest. As usual, myself and Michael Brown will be giving a review of yesterday's trade, to preview of today, maybe a quick look into what we've got coming early next week. I'm not sure what Michael has planned. Maybe offer a bit of value, maybe put a smile on your face, etc., etc. But before we do, I'll get the legals out the way because otherwise Michael will give me a spanking and I don't pay him enough for that. As usual, nothing discussed on the space session constitute trading or investment advice or infers any kind of endorsement by PIQ, myself, Ryan Paisley, or indeed Mr. Michael Brown. How are you, Mr. Michael Brown?
Well, a very good morning to you, Ryan. Good morning, everyone. Very happy Friday. As you said, we
Is
finally
it?
made it to the end
Is
of a
it?
very long week.
Is it a happy Friday?
Of course, it's a happy Friday. The sun is shining. There's barely a cloud in the sky. The market
Oh.
is at a record high. You know, if I'm happy, something must be going right.
Well, yeah, this is very true. What's been occurring, my dear friend? There's no.
Well,
I'll just start by saying there's no Iranian headlines to speak about. So let's
oh,
quickly move
thank
on.
goodness for that. we can move past that special programming and get back to scheduled programming in that case. Where are we this morning? As I said, markets striking a very positive tone indeed yesterday, with stocks rallying across the board. The S&P 500 closing around 0.8% higher. The Nasdaq 100 up by 0.9%. And those gains have extended this morning, with the S&P future pushing north of 6,200 for the first time. And by my reckoning, that puts the cash market on track for a record close later on today,
Whee!
albeit with the proviso that there is still 13 hours to go until the
The 8
market
door
closes
numbers.
later on. Exactly that. In terms of markets elsewhere, it was a relatively mixed day across the Treasury curve, though frankly, most benchmarks sit where they did this time yesterday, with the 10-year still at about 4.27% and the 30-year hovering around 4.82%. But I suppose outside of the equity complex, the big theme of the day yesterday was the weakness that we saw in the dollar, with the dollar index falling around about 0.5% on the day, trending down to 3-year lows just beneath the 97 figure, and in turn that allowed other G10 peers to gain ground, with dollar yen coming back below 144, cable trading north of 137 to its best levels since October of 2021, and the euro advancing up towards 117.5, also to its best levels since the autumn of 2021. In terms of fundamental catalysts yesterday, there was actually quite a lot of news flow, particularly on the issue of trade. Firstly, we heard from Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick. He gave quite a wide-ranging interview late last night on Bloomberg TV. He was confirming that the US, what he called a deal with China, but is what China are calling a framework agreement around the consensus reached in Geneva. So it's essentially just a sort of pledge to carry out more talks, which is
So
very
yeah,
much a reiteration of what we already knew, to be honest.
so on this, like we did say, remember when China first were in talks with the US, we said, look, the upside won't. It was I think it was on a Sunday, wasn't it? It was a Sunday meeting in Geneva, and we said at the time, look, anyone that's expecting a deal from this, they need to go give their head a wobble. What we'll come out with is a framework for a deal. And now all we're getting is, after, what is it, a month or however long, all we're getting now is basically just a reaffirmation that there is a framework still in place. Nothing has changed. Although
Exactly that.
what I will say is, where they are desperate to try and suggest that something has been signed, the FBN's Lawrence, citing a White House source, said that US and China signed paperwork finalising an agreement
Oh, good.
from last week in London, speeding up rare earth exports, though it's not a comprehensive trade deal. So if they are trying to really stretch this, it seems like they might be freeing up the export agreements or the export licensing of, as me and you have commented many times over the past few weeks or months or so, about China limiting the exports of rare earths and magnets and stuff like that for obviously car industry and stuff. So it looks like if they are going to try and turn this into actually, no, there is a deal being signed, it might be related to the rare earths and the magnets and stuff, which, as we know, was something that's in place and it's completely separate to the tariffs anyway. So
Yes, you're
yeah.
absolutely
So
right on that one.
I think long story short, the TLDR is there's been nothing done on a trade deal in terms of tariffs. They might try and muddle the waters or muddy the waters and suggest they've signed something else, or it might just be a framework. But there's nothing significant here.
No, absolutely spot on. And you've clearly read my notes because that was what I was just going to explain. So we can
Yay!
skip over that now. And what else? What else was Lutnick saying? He was also saying that Europe has apparently done what he sees as an excellent job after a slow start to trade negotiations, and that he has become optimistic on an EU deal, but that such a deal will come, and I quote, right at the end. Just speaking of the EU, we did have some other reporting on a
Boom.
potential US-EU trade deal yesterday. The first, well, both of these stories coming via the Wall Street Journal. The first, that President Trump is apparently pushing for the EU to roll back some of its climate regulation as part of this trade deal. Specifically for the lawyers out there, the US's focus is firstly on the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, whatever the hell that is, and secondly on the various methane regulations that are in place in the EU. And this is reportedly as a result of quite intense lobbying from various industry executives in the oil space. And secondly, the Wall Street Journal reporting again yesterday that the European Union is weighing whether they should lower tariffs on US imports to, quote, woo President Trump. I mean, I think this is the sort of bare minimum that the EU should be considering, really. The reporting also continued that leaders are also discussing whether to lower non-tariff barriers, potentially buy more American products, including LNG, and whether they should offer to cooperate with the US to tackle its economic concerns regarding China. Again, why has it taken the EU 2.5 months to basically realise what everyone else realised
Well,
at the start
you
of
know the
April?
answer to your own question
Oh, well,
there.
I do know
Let's
the
be
answer to
honest.
that, yeah.
Let's be very honest here. You know
That's
exactly
very
why it's
true.
taken that long.
That is very true. Just going back to Lutnick very briefly, he also said that the administration are going to announce a bunch of deals in the next week or so. Of course, they were going to do that last week and the week before and the week before that and the week before that, and they haven't yet. So again, I shan't be holding my breath on that front. And lastly, on the trade front, while things with Europe may be progressing, Reuters sources indicating yesterday that US-India trade talks are apparently in deadlock. There are various disagreements going on there around duties on auto components, steel and farm goods, which means that those talks do not appear to be going smoothly at all. Moving away from trade on the data front, we had quite a lot of figures out of the United States yesterday. Q1 GDP was revised quite a significant amount lower, actually, in the final reading, down 0.5% on an annualized quarter-on-quarter basis in the first 3 months of the year. That compares to the initial estimate of minus 0.2%. Again, the numbers skewed massively by all of the tariff front running that was going on in the first 3 months of the year. Other prints that we had out of the United States yesterday included the weekly jobless claims numbers. Initial claims better than expectations at 236,000 in the week to the 21st of June. Continuing claims, though, came in quite a chunk softer than expected at 1.974 million, up from the prior 1.945 million. And of course, that continuing claims print pertains to the June non-farm payrolls survey week. We also got the latest durable goods orders data out of the States yesterday. Goods orders rising by 16.4% in the month of May, a vast improvement on the 6.3% decline that we saw
But
in April. But as we flagged in the Morning Blast yesterday, we'll do a little victory lap. We saw all of that pretty much come from Boeing. Of course, Boeing signed an order for 200 odd jets from Qatar in the month of May. And as if to labour that point, non-defence aircraft orders rose by 230.8% on a month-on-month basis, which effectively means you can ignore the durable goods orders
exactly
stats
that.
in their
Exactly that.
entirety. We also had a 7-year note auction out of the States yesterday. That stopped through the when issued by 0.2 basis points, which isn't too bad at all. And lastly, just to finish that data wrap up, we had Ryan's favourite data point out of Japan overnight. Tokyo CPI rising
Yay.
by rising by 3.1% on an annual basis in June, below both expectations and the prior print of 3.4%. 4%. So perhaps lessening the need for the BOJ to hike rates in the near future. Just a few other headlines lastly before I hand back to you, Ryan. On the Fed, we heard from a whole host of Fed speakers yesterday, including Goolsbee, Barkin and Daly. Pretty much all of them stressing that they are still in wait and see mode. They want to digest further data before delivering any additional rate cuts. Daly did say that the Fed could adjust rates in the autumn, but do bear in mind she doesn't vote until 2027. Nevertheless, this does once again emphasise how Governors Bowman and Waller are increasingly isolated in their view that a rate cut could be appropriate as soon as July. It is also becoming increasingly obvious, I think, that their dovish overtures in recent days are frankly quite blatantly politically motivated, particularly when none of their colleagues are singing from that particular hymn sheet. Speaking of politics in the US, just to go back to that momentarily, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said late yesterday that he is asking now Congress to remove Section 899 from the One
Oh yeah,
Big
that one.
Beautiful Bill. Well, this is actually important because Section
Oh,
899 is what was sort of colloquially termed the revenge tax provisions.
oh right, yeah.
So that is now being taken out of the bill. Treasury Secretary Bessent saying that they will announce a similar measure via the OECD instead. Because that always ends up going well. That simply isn't going to happen. And last but by no means least, sort of pet topic on the Morning Blast at the moment, the shambles that is the Office for National Statistics here
Oh
in the
God.
UK. Reuters sources reporting yesterday on a review that had been done into the ONS, a supposedly independent review, basically to try and work out why they have become such a shambles. The first recommendation from this review is very, very close to my heart, which is a recommendation that folk working for the ONS need to actually go back to the office and stop working from
Oh
home.
God.
They quote from the review, a wider recognition of the benefits of teams spending time together in one place is necessary. I quite agree. The review also
Just
noted.
just quickly on this. You weren't part of this reviewing board, were you?
No, I wasn't, contrary
Okay.
to expectations. And one of the other conclusions of this review is that a, quote, senior official will be appointed to tackle problems at the Statistics Office. Now, of course, that is going to do absolutely nothing to solve the issue, but I suppose it doesn't matter because this senior official will get paid a huge salary, and when they inevitably fail to improve things, they'll be riding off to the sunset, into the sunset with a gold-plated pension anyway. So while statistics will remain a shambles, they will at least be okay.
And every chance that someone like that fails upwards to the BOE.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Your next NPC member has just been appointed.
God help us.
Well, thank you for that on finishing on such a cheery note. Also, just a quick shout out to Mark Bays, our dear friend. No, I haven't been drinking. No, I'm not hungover. I think this is why I might be sounding like I'm lisping and struggling to read. Maybe I do need a drink. But no, it's the lack of drink I think is the problem at the moment. But anyway, some choice headlines from our always awesome overnight news roundup, courtesy of Zach Eisman. Again, do give him a follow. Do subscribe to the Substack. Starting off in trade. Obviously, we've covered a little bit on this, but US President Trump said on Thursday he signed an agreement with China on Wednesday related to trade, but he did not specify details. That's because there are none. As I said just now, SBN's Lawrence, citing the White House sources, claiming that this is paperwork being signed in relation to speeding up China's rare earth exports, which we know had nothing to do with tariffs. So it's just interesting to see if we do get any more colour on this one. Or maybe Trump was just ordering a Panda Express or something like that. I don't know. The US and other countries reached an agreement to exempt US-based companies from some corporate taxes under the 2021 International Minimum Tax Agreement. That's according to Besant. US Commerce Secretary Lutnick said White House has imminent plans to reach agreements with 10 major trading partners. No doubt, he said, it's just weeks away, is what it seems to be his usual line at the moment, but we've been hearing that for many, many weeks. The EU is considering lowering tariffs on US imports to secure a quick trade deal with President Trump, according to WSJ sources. European Commission President von der Leyen said the EU received the latest US document for tariff negotiations, noting all options remain on the table after an EU summit. Japan, they're going to impose a 95.2 anti-dumping duties on graphite electrodes from China for 5 years starting next month, solidifying exactly, Michael. Solidifying a provisional measure, the finance ministry said, according to Reuters. In macro
Actually,
news,
on Japan.
Go
I
on.
was
Don't do
reading a
the eyes.
story. Oh God. I was reading a story about Japan yesterday. Apparently, they're having big issues with rice at the moment.
Oh,
Rice prices are surging, and apparently, they've got elections in July, and apparently
they
that's going to be the main issue. So hopefully, there's
yeah.
a grain of truth in that at least.
Oh God, I wonder why you're bringing this up. But yeah, but on a serious note, no, they've had it for a good few weeks now. A huge issue with domestic rice production, and
And
they're
they
actually
don't want to import rice
no,
because it's
because
not
it's
as
seen
good
as
as
a
their own, apparently.
yeah, no, because it's seen as like, complete, devastation if, domestically, if Japan have to buy rice because, that's their one staple. But funny enough, you won't be surprised to know that's come up a couple of times on the grain market blast with me and Angie. But one thing where this all kicked off is the minister that's in charge of all of this, admitted that he's never actually bought any rice because he always gets given it to him. So then he had to resign. So yeah,
I
Japanese
mean,
politics. It's
of
not.
all the bribes you could be given, eh?
Yeah, no, exactly that. It's not all two girls and one octopus in Japanese politics. Moving
Oh
on
God, move
swiftly
on,
on,
move on.
move on. Macro news: Fed's Kashkari said recent U.S. inflation data is quite positive. Because that was a quote there. But tariffs inflationary effects may be delayed, adding, "quote We still need a better assessment of their economic impact." Unquote. Core consumer inflation in Japan's capital slowed to 3.1%, as Michael alluded to earlier in June. My favorite economic data set. The reason for that being is it's pretty much the one true leading indicator because Tokyo's inflation comes out about a month before Japan as a whole. This was primarily due to utility bill cuts, but remains above Bank of Japan's 2% target. China's industrial profits declined in May from a year earlier, reversing prior gains as weak demand on US trade tariffs weighed on profitability. Reuters poll showed China's factory activity likely shrank for a third straight month in June as manufacturers await durable US trade deal to revive shipments.
You've
The
waited a long
UK
time.
Yeah, well, this is quite. UK vehicle production collapsed in May to its lowest level since 1949. Um, we'll have to give Dickie a call and see what they was like back then. Hi, Dickie.
Even he might not have been around.
Yeah, as Trump's tariff war forced Aston Martin and other British car makers to halt US shipments. Moody's and S&P downgraded Colombia's credit rating, citing a worsening debt burden, suspension of fiscal rule curbing government's borrowing. That's according to Bloomberg. Geopolitical news. We have got one Iran headline, but it's not to do with the war with Israel. Iran denied that nuclear talks with the US are scheduled to resume, diminishing prospects of diplomacy after President Trump suggested a deal could come next week. India's defense minister, Mr. Singh, I'm not taking a piss there, it's genuinely Mr. Singh, told his Chinese counterparts that both countries should seek a permanent solution to their decades-old border disputes. Obviously, that's up in the Himalayan borders with China. Equities. Nike expects a slower decline in sales and margins this quarter as it clears aged inventory and boosts marketing while cutting reliance on China production to mitigate US tariffs. A new Xiaomi sports utility vehicle has drawn a rush on first day orders, with analysts calling it a potential, quote, Tesla killer. I did see a note on this that actually we posted, PIQ posted. I think they're pricing this $2,000 or $1,000 less than the Tesla model, the equivalent Tesla model. So it'd be interesting to see how far Tesla's sales in China fall off a cliff on the back of this, as they're already very much suffering. SoftBank Group CEO Masayoshi Son said the company aims to become the biggest platform provider for artificial superintelligence within 10 years. So we've moved from AI to ASI, I guess. Toyota Motor sales hit a third straight monthly record in May, driven by strong demand for hybrid vehicles in the US, Japan and China. And Novo Nordisk's new injectable obesity drug showed potential for higher weight loss than current market leaders in early stage trials. I'm back to you in the studio.
Oh, I was expecting a pun there. I
Well, I've almost pretty much given up, to be honest, because
can't
why try and
compete, can you?
I genuinely can't. I would rather rather than compete, I'd rather take the stand that I don't want to do any puns, and then it gives me free rein to mock your puns, because otherwise it'd be quite hypocritical of me.
That is very true. Right, in terms of today, then, it is quite frankly a pretty barren European morning. We have had CPI data out of France and Spain already, which were both a little bit hotter than expected. But other than that, there is not much going on. Stateside, we do have a few releases due this afternoon at 1:30. We have the latest core PCE figures out of the United States. Of course, I now need to tell you that this is the Fed's preferred inflation metric.
Drink, drink.
This. Despite that, I would not expect it to be a market mover at all, particularly after Fed Chair Powell said at last week's press conference that the FOMC are expecting headline PCE to have risen by 2.3% on an annual basis in May, and that the core metric is expected to have risen by 2.6% year on year. Of course, this is May data, so although all the usual suspects will go, oh, it shows there's no tariff effect yet, well, we kind of knew that already from the CPI figures, which were out 2.5 weeks ago, not really adding anything to the overall narrative. Also at 1:30, we get the latest GDP data out of Canada. The economy expected to have stagnated on a month-on-month basis in April compared to the very modest 0.1% growth that Canada saw in March. Also out of the States this afternoon, but at 3:00, we have the latest consumer sentiment figures from the University of Michigan. That index is expected unrevised at 60.5 in the final reading for June. Other bits and bobs to focus on. Of course, we do have a few Fed speakers. We're likely to hear from Williams, Hannock and Cook as we move through the day today, although as noted earlier, none of them are likely to lean into the idea of anything other than a wait and see approach to policy. The ECB's Vilroy and Wren will also be speaking as we move through the afternoon as well. As we move into the weekend, of course, do bear in mind the potential for gapping risk if we see any geopolitical and or trade headlines develop while markets are closed. And then just looking ahead into next week, because Ryan sprung that on me without giving me any warning. It is a holiday shortened week next week with Independence Day in the US on Friday. In terms of major events, though, we do have the latest inflation figures out of the Eurozone on Tuesday. Thursday is Jobs Day next week, a day earlier than usual owing to the 4th of July celebration. So the June non-farm payrolls numbers drop on Thursday lunchtime. And next week is also actually the ECB's annual shindig in Sintra in Portugal. And we are due to hear, I think it's Tuesday afternoon, there's a panel taking place with ECB President Lagarde, Fed Chair Powell, BOE Governor Bailey and BOJ Governor Ueda, so that may be one to watch there. But otherwise, for this morning and for this week, that is all from me.
We might have to have some, as Basie just kind of said on X to us, we might have to have some beers on July 4th for Phil.
Why ever not?
Why? Yeah, why not? And it's not like we don't need many excuses. But anyway,
Michael,
Michael, I
as
don't
if
know
an
what time.
excuse was required.
No, exactly. There we go. July 4th beers, exactly. We'll celebrate our American friends. Nick, we do it all for you if you're listening. Michael,
Biggest
thank you.
mistake they've ever made, that.
Yeah, well, quite. Michael, thank you so much as always. Zach, I can see you listening. Thank you so much as always for putting together the overnight news roundup for us. Listeners, thank you for listening. And whatever you're doing today and this weekend, keep it tight, stay safe, and we'll see you all on Monday. Much love.
Bye for now.